The night was heavy with rain, and the lonely wind howled through the open plains like a cry from an aching heart. In the distance, lightning revealed the silhouette of a small, broken farmhouse, its roof patched with tin, its windows cracked, its spirit as weary as the woman who lived inside. Clara Bennett, a young widow of 26, sat near a flickering lamp, clutching a threadbare blanket around her little boy. Eli, whose soft breaths came shallow and uneven. His small hands were burning with fever. The doctor in town had said the medicine was too expensive, and Clara had nothing left to sell except her wedding ring, which she had refused to part with. It was the only piece of her past she had left, the last thing her husband had given her before the war took him away. She whispered softly, "Hold on, baby. Mama's here," pressing her trembling hand against his forehead. The storm outside grew fiercer, rattling the door like an angry ghost. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the empty shelves, the cold fireplace, and the little boy she could barely keep alive. Her heart ached with desperation, not just for the medicine, but for something deeper: protection, warmth, love. She was alone in a world that seemed to have forgotten her. Then through the storm, she heard it, the sound of hooves pounding against the soaked earth. She rose quickly, clutching her shawl. The silhouette of a man on horseback appeared near the fence, tall, broad-shouldered, his hat dripping rain, his coat dark and heavy. The light from his lantern cut through the storm like a blade. Clara's heart raced. Few men ever rode this far out at night. She opened the door slightly, and the wind nearly tore it from her hand. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The rider dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the mud. "Name's Luke Carson," he said in a deep, gravelly voice that carried warmth even through the storm. "Your light was flickering. Figured someone might need help." Clara hesitated. He was a rancher. She could tell from the worn leather gloves and the scent of hay and saddle. His face was rugged, shadowed by stubble and rain, his eyes a deep kind of lonely. For a moment, she saw in him the kind of man who'd known hardship too. "My boy's sick," she said finally, her voice breaking, "and I've got no one else to turn to." Luke nodded, stepping closer. "You got a doctor?" "I can't afford one," she whispered. "Not anymore." He looked at her, at the small, fragile figure standing in that broken doorway, trying to be strong for her child. Something inside him softened. "Let me take a look at him," he said, stepping inside. Clara led him to the bed where Eli lay, his small body trembling. Luke placed his rough hand gently on the boy's forehead. "He's burning up," he muttered. "He needs medicine and warmth. He won't last till morning if this keeps up." Clara turned away, covering her face with her hands. "I've tried everything," she whispered. "I sold my husband's tools, the mule, even my last bit of corn. There's nothing left, Mr. Carson." Luke stood silently for a moment, the sound of rain echoing against the roof. Then he said, "I've got a horse that can make it to town before dawn. I'll fetch what he needs." Her eyes widened. "You'd do that for us?" He met her gaze. "No one deserves to lose a child alone in the dark." Clara's throat tightened. She didn't know this man, yet in that moment, his voice felt like the first kind word she'd heard in months. But when he turned to leave, the wind slammed the door, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, something haunted. "Wait," she said quickly. Why would you help me? You don't even know who I am." He paused, hand on the door. "Because once someone tried to help me, and I was too proud to let them. I won't make that mistake again." He rode off into the storm, his lantern bobbing in the distance. Hours passed before he returned, drenched, exhausted, but carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were bottles of medicine, bandages, and a loaf of bread. Clara could barely speak through her tears. Luke knelt beside Eli, giving him a spoonful of medicine, then stoked the fire until the room glowed with warmth. Slowly, color returned to the boy's face. "You're a good man," she whispered. He shook his head. "Just someone trying to do right." When the night quieted and the storm faded to a soft drizzle, Clara noticed Luke sitting by the window, staring into the dark horizon. His hat was off now, his hair damp, his eyes tired but kind. She brought him a cup of weak tea, the best she could offer. "You've done so much," she said softly. I don't know how to thank you." He smiled faintly. "You don't have to." There was a long silence between them, not awkward, but filled with something unspoken. Two souls bruised by life, finding a flicker of comfort in each other's company. The firelight painted their faces in gold and shadow, and Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years, safe. Then came the sound that made her heart drop. Hooves again, but not Luke's this time. She rushed to the window. 3 men on horseback rode up, torches in hand. Her breath caught in her throat. "Oh no!" Luke rose instantly. "Who are they?" "Debt collectors," she whispered. "They come every month. I told them I'd pay, but I couldn't." The men dismounted roughly, shouting, "Clara Bennett! We've come for the land, unless you can pay tonight." Luke's jaw tightened. "Stay inside," he said, stepping toward the door. But Clara grabbed his arm. "Please don't. They're dangerous." He turned to her, his eyes steady. "They won't lay a hand on you or your boy." Outside, the men sneered as Luke stepped into the mud. The rain, now just a soft drizzle. "And who might you be, cowboy?" One of them spat. "I'm her husband," Luke said without hesitation, his voice low and firm. "And you'll take your threats elsewhere." Clara gasped from the doorway. The words hit her like a thunderclap. Her husband. For a second, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The men looked at each other, uncertain. "Husband?" One repeated. "Didn't think the widow Bennett had one left." "She does now," Luke said coldly, his hand resting near his holster. "And if you know what's good for you, you'll ride on before I make you." The leader cursed, but the steel in Luke's eyes made him hesitate. After a tense moment, they turned their horses and disappeared into the night. Only when they were gone did Clara realize she was trembling. Why did you say that?" she whispered as he came back inside, dripping wet but calm. Luke looked at her quietly. "Because sometimes the only way to protect someone is to stand where no one else will." She looked at him for a long moment, this stranger who had risked himself for her, for a child he'd never met before tonight. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "Please, be my husband just for tonight. I can't face them again alone." Luke froze. The words cut straight through the quiet, trembling air. He looked at her, at the desperate honesty in her eyes, the strength behind her fear, and in that moment he nodded slowly. "All right," he said softly. "Just for tonight." Clara lowered her head, whispering, "Thank you." The fire crackled between them as the storm outside faded completely. For the first time in years, Clara felt the weight of loneliness lift, even if just for a moment. And as Luke sat quietly beside her, watching the boys sleep, something began to stir in both their hearts, something neither dared to name. But they didn't know, this one night, born of desperation, would change both their lives forever. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in the silence of dawn. Mist rolled across the empty fields, carrying the scent of wet earth and the faint promise of a new day. The sky was painted in soft grey, and the first light touched the edges of the old farmhouse, where 2 souls sat in quiet thought. Clara Bennett had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Luke standing in the rain, shielding her, claiming her as his wife before those men. The words still echoed in her heart. "I'm her husband." No one had said that name for her in years. No one had stood beside her like that since the war took everything away. She rose quietly, checking on her little boy. Eli was sleeping peacefully now, the fever broken, his breathing soft and even. Relief washed over her like sunlight breaking through clouds. She brushed a curl from his forehead and smiled for the first time in months. When she turned, she saw Luke sitting by the fire, his hat on his knee, staring at the dying embers like a man fighting ghosts of his own. His shirt was still damp, the edge of a scar visible near his collarbone. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. He shook his head, voice low. "Didn't want to wake him." Clara walked closer, her bare feet brushing against the worn wooden floor. "You stayed up all night?" He smiled faintly. "Been a while since I had a roof over me. Didn't want to waste the feeling." His words carried something heavy, a loneliness deeper than hers. She poured him a cup of warm water, their eyes meeting for a heartbeat too long. He looked away first, taking a sip. "You'll need to go into town today," he said. "Those men might come back when they realized they were bluffed." Clara's face paled. They'll find out you're not really—" He raised a hand gently. "They don't need to find out anything. You said you owed them for the land?" She nodded slowly. "The loan was my husband's before he died. I've been trying to pay it off with sewing and small farm work. But it's never enough." Luke set his cup down. "I'll settle it." Clara blinked. "No, I can't let you—" He met her eyes firmly. "You didn't ask me to. I'm offering. I've got more land than I can work alone. I can spare what's needed." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why? Why would you do this for someone you just met?" He looked into the fire for a long moment before answering. "Because once I had a wife, and I lost her. Not to war, but to the kind of hardship no one should face alone. I wasn't there when she needed me most. I swore I'd never turn away from someone in need again." The words hung in the air like smoke, raw, aching, true. Clara covered her mouth, feeling his pain as if it were her own. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Luke stood and reached for his hat. "Don't be. Sometimes life burns everything we love just to teach us what love really is." He started toward the door, but she stepped in front of him. "You can't just walk out now. Not after what you did. They'll come back and I can't face them alone." Her voice cracked, trembling between gratitude and fear. He paused, eyes softening. "Then I'll stay, just till you're safe." Her heart thudded. She wanted to tell him to stay longer, to stay forever, but she couldn't, not when she barely understood the storm inside her. Instead, she nodded and whispered, "Thank you, Luke." Days passed. Luke repaired the fences, fixed the roof, and tilled the forgotten patch of land behind the barn. He was quiet, steady, and kind in a way that didn't ask for thanks. Clara cooked simple meals and watched him from the window, her heart growing restless. She noticed the way he smiled when Eli followed him around with curious eyes, how gentle his hands became when helping the boy feed the hens. Eli laughed again, a sound Clara hadn't heard in months. The little farmhouse that once felt like a tomb now echoed with warmth. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the sky, Clara stood by the porch watching Luke work. "You've done more for us than anyone," she said softly when he came to wash his hands by the well. "You didn't have to stay." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the sunset. "I know, but I wanted to." The silence between them was tender, filled with something that didn't need words. The air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked grass, and Clara felt her heart twist, not in pain, but in longing. "I used to dream," she whispered, "that someone would come and save me. But dreams don't come true for women like me." Luke stepped closer, his voice quiet. "Maybe they do. Maybe you just stopped believing too soon." Clara's breath caught as his hand brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. It wasn't a touch of desire, but of understanding, the kind that heals without asking. She wanted to lean in, to let her heart remember what it was like to feel alive. But fear held her still. That night, Eli climbed onto Luke's lap as they sat by the fire. "Mr. Luke," he said sleepily, "are you going to stay forever?" Luke smiled faintly, his rough hand patting the boy's shoulder. "Forever's a long time, little man." "But Mama smiles again when you're here," Eli murmured before drifting off to sleep. Luke froze, his heart twisted with an ache he thought he'd buried. He looked at Clara, her eyes glistening in the firelight. For a long moment, neither spoke. The truth was too fragile to say aloud. But life never lets warmth linger too long. The next morning, dust clouds rose on the horizon, the same men returning, this time with the sheriff. Clara's hands trembled as she stepped outside. "Luke, they know," she whispered. "They found out." The sheriff dismounted, eyeing Luke warily. "Heard there's been a false claim made here, about being your husband." "Care to explain, ma'am?" Clara's throat closed. The truth clawed at her chest, but when she looked at Luke, calm, silent, ready to take the blame, something inside her broke open. She stepped forward. "He is my husband," she said firmly, her voice steady even as her heart raced. "By promise, if not by paper. And if it's a crime to be saved, then I'll share the punishment." Luke's eyes widened, not in shock, but in something deeper, pride, gratitude, love. The sheriff studied them for a moment, then sighed. "You two sort your affairs, but debts need paying. 1 week or the land's gone." They rode off, leaving silence behind. Clara turned to Luke, her face pale. I couldn't let them shame you, she whispered. He stepped closer, gently tilting her chin. You didn't just save me, Clara. You gave me back something I thought was gone. Hope. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Then stay. Not just for tonight. Not just to protect us. Stay, because maybe we need each other. Luke looked at her for a long time, the dawn breaking fully behind her. The light caught in her hair, and for the first time in years, he smiled without pain. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small folded paper, an old land deed. This place, he said, handing it to her, belongs to you now. It's paid in full. Clara gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Luke, I can't accept this. Yes, you can, he said softly. Because it is not a gift. It's a promise. I'll build something here, if you'll let me. She stared at him, tears blurring her vision. You mean? He nodded. If you'll have me, Clara Bennett, I'll be your husband. For real this time. For a heartbeat, time stopped. The wind fell silent, the earth still. Then Clara's tears turned into laughter, soft, trembling, beautiful. She threw her arms around him. And for the first time in years, she felt the world hold her back. Eli ran out the door, giggling. Mama, are we going to be a family now? Luke lifted him into his arms, smiling. Yes, son. A family. And as the sun rose high above the ranch, the woman who had once begged for one night of kindness found a lifetime of love in its place. The land bloomed again, laughter filled the house, and the lonely rancher who rode by one stormy night found his home, not in the soil, but in the heart of a woman who had forgotten how to dream. Because sometimes one whispered plea can change two destinies forever.